If you listen to enough music from, say, the 1970s, I'm thinking dub, reggae, psychedelic rock, you start to hear this signature sound.
Oh, yeah.
It's this warm, kind of broken, tape-aged echo.
That's the Roland RE-201 Space Echo. It's legendary. But, I mean, the reality of
The
it.
reality was a nightmare. If you wanted that sound, you needed this huge, fragile vintage machine that demanded constant maintenance. You were literally feeding it loops of magnetic tape.
They were amazing, but completely impractical for the average musician on the road.
And that impracticality, it just created this huge sonic gap for decades, really. Musicians were desperate for that specific character, that warmth, but they needed something reliable.
Which is what makes our topic today so fascinating. How Bios, which is Roland's sister company, decided to tackle this problem. This was back in 2007 with the RE-20, the twin pedal Space Echo.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into the Bios RE-20, a pedal that, really feels like a landmark. It was basically the first time that legendary complex sound was successfully put into a modern stomp box.
Precisely. And our mission here is to analyze how they pulled it off. We need to understand the breakthrough, how they used what was, pretty early digital modeling to define this really distinct tonal character, a character that still sets it apart, even from its successors. And we want to look at why this specific pedal became a foundation for basically all modern delay technology.
Before the RE-20 showed up, your options for that multi-head echo sound were pretty slim.
Yeah, what were you going to do?
You're either hunting for a working vintage unit, which was a gamble, dealing with these huge, expensive rack units, or saving up for some boutique clone that cost a fortune. It was not a sound for the masses.
And the RE-20 just completely changed that landscape. It made true multi-head tape echo accessible. It made it practical for a normal pedal board. But it wasn't enough to just simulate a delay. They had to capture the three core things that musicians loved about the original.
Okay, so what were those three non-negotiables?
First, the warmth, the way the repeats degrade, but in a really musical way. Second, that organic modulation. The subtle wobble we call wow and flutter that makes it feel alive.
And the third has to be the feedback.
Right, absolutely. That famous musical self-oscillation, that runaway feedback. If the RE-20 didn't deliver on those three things, it would have been a failure.
It also has this huge historical significance for Bios themselves. I mean, now they have the little RE-2, the big RE-202.
Yeah.
But the RE-20 was the test case. It laid all the groundwork.
It really did. It proved that players would actually embrace a digital version of a beloved analog machine. And you have to remember, we're talking about replacing a physical mechanical process, tape wearing out, motors changing speed.
All that beautiful chaos.
Exactly, replacing it with solid-state digital circuitry. And back in 2007, the skepticism around digital modeling was still pretty high.
That's a great point. So how did they overcome that? What were players worried about?
Well, the skepticism was all about fidelity. Players just didn't believe digital could capture the nonlinear booty of tape saturation or the randomness of wow and flutter.
So how did the RE-20 win them over?
Because Bios didn't try to make a perfect, clean digital copy. They leaned into their CUSO-SM modeling technology, that's composite object sound modeling, to replicate the imperfections of the machine, not just the delay time.
Okay, so let's dive into that tech.
Yeah.
The core of this thing is that early-gen Roland COCO-SM modeling. So they weren't just making a delay, they were simulating an entire electromechanical system.
They were, and this is where they really earned their stripes. They digitally replicated all the messy, charming bits, the friction of the tape, the specific sound of the three playback heads, and of course, the key ingredient, tape saturation.
And for anyone listening who might not know, tape saturation is that subtle distortion that happens when the tape just can't handle any more signal. It's what makes everything sound warm and kind of glues it together.
Exactly. And the COSM engine had to model that, plus the pitch variation of wow and flutter, and this is a big one, the very specific sound of the original spring reverb Kank. That is a lot to cram into one pedal.
And beyond the modeling, just the architecture itself was pretty forward-thinking. It had mono in, but stereo out, which is huge for modern players.
It is, and they made the controls so hands-on, no menu diving. You feel like you're actually using the vintage machine.
Let's walk through those controls, because that's really how you interact with this virtual machine. You've got the main echo section, starting with repeat rate,
which is your delay time or your virtual tape speed. And crucially, when you turn this knob, the pitch of the repeats swoops up and down, just like the original. You can play it like an instrument.
Then you have intensity.
Yeah.
That's the feedback, right? How much of the signal gets sent back through.
And once you turn that knob past noon, you are inviting that classic self-oscillation. And then, you've got your standard echo volume to mix it in.
But the tone shaping is key here and often gets overlooked. You get dedicated bass and treble knobs.
And this is so important. They only affect the repeats, not your dry guitar sound. So you can dial in these super dark, murky echoes or bright, splashy ones. It adds so much texture.
And then rounding it out, there's a dedicated reverb volume for that mottled spring sound.
But maybe the most important control on the whole pedal is that big mode selector knob. That's the key to the multi-head patterns.
Tell us about those modes. The original had physical tape heads you could combine, right?
Exactly. And the RE20 gives you 11 modes that replicate those combinations. So you get single head slapbacks, dual head rhythmic patterns, all 3 heads at once. Each one has a totally different rhythmic feel. It's essential for stuff like dub music.
And for playing live, you have the foot switches. Left is on-off, and the right is tap tempo. Super useful.
But here's the feature that really elevates it. The expression pedal input. This turns it from a static effect into a real performance instrument.
So what can you control with the expression pedal?
You can assign it to repeat rate, intensity, echo volume, or reverb volume. So you can imagine using your foot to sweep the delay time for those crazy pitch bends, or pushing the feedback right to the edge of chaos during a solo and then pulling it back.
Wow, yeah.
That ability to manipulate it on the fly is what made it a staple for ambient and experimental players.
That really bridges the gap between digital convenience and that tactile, playable feel of the original machine. Which brings us to the core of it, the actual tonal feel.
The sound is it's so different from a modern high-definition delay. The RE20 sound is all about those analog imperfections it models so well. The repeats are warm, they're rounded, and they have the slightly darkened decay. The attack of each echo is softened, so it never sounds harsh or digital.
So this is where that paradox comes in. If you compare the RE20 to its newer, technically superior siblings like the RE202, what's the big difference you hear?
The distinguishing character of the RE20 is its graininess. It has this thicker, maybe less refined mid-range, and it just feels more lo-fi. And that slight digital grit, that's a byproduct of the early COSM tech.
Yeah.
And many players will argue that it actually sounds more like a real worn-out vintage machine than the super clean high-def models that came later. It's like the technological imperfection is the secret ingredient.
So this slightly older, less perfect algorithm became the desired sound. A happy accident.
It really is. And speaking of signatures, the self-oscillation on this thing is just legendary.
Why is that?
Because it's predictable chaos. When you push the intensity, the feedback is gradual, it swells, it doesn't just instantly scream at you like some digital delays do. It feels musical as it runs away.
And the fact that you can twist the repeat rate knob while it's doing that.
That's the key. You can steer the noise. You're playing the feedback like it's a synthesizer. That made it absolutely essential for dub producers, where the delay is basically the lead instrument.
And what about that spring reverb? That's always so hard to get right.
They went for vintage character, which was the right move. It's splashy, it's metallic, it sounds like a real spring. You can hear the sproing. It's not a lush, modern reverb. It's there to complement the echo, just like on the original machine. Use it subtly.
Okay, let's talk use cases, because this pedal is way more than just a guitar echo.
Oh, it's all over the map. For classic echo, it's a must-have for rockabilly slapback, surf guitar, blues, and definitely psychedelic rock where you need those rhythmic pulses.
But I feel like its real strength is in creating textures.
For ambient and shoegaze, absolutely. The multi-head modes and the stereo output are incredible. You can build these huge evolving soundscapes, and the subtle tape warble from the wow and flutter adds this organic movement.
And going back to the source, dub and reggae have such a specific rhythmic relationship with delay.
They do, and the 11 head combinations are perfect for that. You can ride the feedback in real time to create those siren effects and deep washes that define the genre, and you can do it all night without your tape loop breaking.
The sources also mentioned a lot of studio use, not just on pedal boards.
For sure. The stereo out was a huge plus. Producers used it on everything, not just guitars. You could run a synth pad, a drum machine, even vocals through it to get that warmth and tape compression.
So it's almost like a texture box, adding that analog weight to digital sounds.
Precisely. It was a quick way to get a classic vocal slapback or add life to electronic drums. And the tap tempo was great in the studio for locking in with the track.
So when you add all that up, what's its enduring legacy? Why is this 2007 pedal still so important?
It was the bridge. It single-handedly revived mainstream interest in tape echo and moved it from the expensive boutique world onto regular pedal boards. It influenced a whole generation of ambient and experimental players who suddenly had access to these sounds.
It really did become the gold standard on pro boards for years. It proved that digital could capture the soul of a fragile analog machine.
Yeah, it set the bar for every delay that came after it. It's fair to call it the space echo that started it all for pedals.
So before we wrap up, let's do a quick balanced view. The pros are obvious. First successful pedal version, authentic feel, musical feedback, tap tempo, stereo out, built like a tank.
Right. And the considerations, they really just show its age. There's no preset storage, which is a big one for live players. The reverb is just that one spring sound, and it has a pretty big footprint.
And what about the modeling itself? The wow and flutter is fixed.
Right, it is, yeah. That means the amount of pitch wobble is baked in. You can't dial it up or down like on newer pedals. That contributes to its unique character, but it's less flexible. And of course, that older COSM modeling gives it that grainier tone, which might not be for everyone.
But even with those trade-offs, that specific tone keeps the demand super high on the used market.
It does. For a lot of players, that specific digital graininess is absolutely worth it.
So the Bios RE20 Space Echo, it remains a classic, an influential, and a really expressive delay pedal, celebrated for its warm, grainy, and just incredibly musical character.
And that leads us back to our final thought for you to chew on today. The RE20 got its famous analog warmth from what was, early digital tech that's arguably inferior to what we have now.
Right.
This older modeling resulted in a sound that's more lo-fi, more grainy than its successors. So we have to wonder, when you're trying to translate these classic analog tones, is technological imperfection, that slight graininess of older modeling, is that actually the secret ingredient to capturing the original charming organic warmth